All right, you saw some crazy shit. Share what happened. What'd you see?
Yeah, so because of prohibition, there's we saw a variety of crazy stuff early on because there was no governance really to point to. You couldn't go to the first crazy shit we started hearing about was actually what the police and the sheriffs were doing to our members. So our members would tell us stories of trying to move inventory from Northern California to the biggest market on earth, Southern California, and that they would have to come through this bottleneck on the 101 freeway through Rohnert Park. And Rohnert Park sheriffs were extorting all of the farmers as they were coming through this one little bottleneck, and there was no way around this bottleneck really. And so the Rohnert Park sheriffs would pull you over, they would put your hands on the car, they would take out your weed, your oil, your money, and they would just stand there and talk to the farmer, talk to the logistics person for 45 minutes to an hour, saying things like, how are you going to learn a lesson if you leave here today and you still have your marijuana, your money, and you haven't learned a lesson? And they would just keep talking to the farmers, hoping that the farmers would break and say, why don't you keep the money? And they eventually got sued. And now Rohnert Park had to fire these sheriffs, and they're paying out settlement money. They've paid out millions of dollars of settlement money to cannabis collectives that were medical collectives that have now proven that they were operating properly. And so it was the sheriffs that were shaking and extorting people.
Wow.
We had other incidents where people had a store they said was a store. It would be advertised on known places, but it was a front. It wasn't a legitimate store, and they were there to try and jack people. There were other instances. Yeah.
So you'd walk in like looking to buy pot and you get robbed.
They were targeting the supply chain, so they would try to use any sources of finding professionals, trick them into thinking they had a brick and mortar dispensary. Right. And so you have to be very careful. Weed Club, fortunately for us as a connector, we've been able to sail through that medical collective period, because it's really when you start track and trace and you put in the statewide regulation that you actually start to mitigate the unregulated markets. And so the unregulated market was actually a healthy endeavor, because you have patients getting marijuana, you have genetics getting preserved. But it's untenable when you have cartels running the show, because they might not be rational. Like, they don't make a rational decision when they're mediating a dispute amongst cartels, And so we just wanted to stay as far away from that as we could. And when we first started Weed Club, I was lucky to sit down with Seth Godin, who's a marketer.
Oh, yeah.
Seth's blog. And he was the founder of Squidoo. And he came to our office, which is Runway in the Twitter building, and we have an igloo. And so we sat down in our igloo, and Seth was talking about how you had to be ready to excommunicate from your community. If you wanted to be a community, you couldn't just welcome everybody. You had to excommunicate people at times if they didn't perform by the expectation of the community. If the ethos of the community was to be on time for a meeting, and you were late, you should be excommunicated. If you were a cartel, you should automatically be excommunicated.